Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to go through question 3 for the 2021 3 Express Final Term Examination paper. So essentially, this question deals with the reliability question from the source-based case study itself. Okay, so we're going to look at the approach to answering reliability questions with reference to this particular question. Okay, so the question is, study source D, do you trust what the source tells us about revisions to the CPF scheme? Okay, so one thing you should note, right, is that the focus of this particular question is about the revisions to the CPF scheme. Okay, so what does it tell us about the revisions? The revision. So this is the key word, right? Revision the CPF scheme. Okay, so let's read the main source, so study source D. So let's look at source D itself. We see that it's an extract from a parliamentary speech by then Minister for Manpower, right? Okay, well, so it says the CPF is a mandatory savings account that helps us put aside money today to cover our needs in old age. When the CPF was first introduced almost 60 years ago, members could withdraw their money at age 55 in a lump sum. That was because at that time, someone could expect to live only another 6 to 7 years after that. Today, one could expect to live a further 30 years or more. Allowing a full withdrawal from CPF at the age of 55 today will put us at risk of outliving our savings in old age. To blindly keep to the same withdrawal age of 55, which made sense then, would be wrong and irresponsible. Okay, so clearly, based on this particular source, we know that certain changes have been made to the CPF scheme, right, to reflect current realities. Okay, so what does this source tell us about revisions to the CPF scheme? Okay, so essentially we're coming to an inference, right, on the impact of the revisions to the CPF scheme. So essentially, the whole source study is about whether Singaporeans support, right, the CPF scheme or not. So we're looking at whether it benefits them or not. So in this case, do the changes benefit people? So we can see that, yeah, actually it does, right? It does benefit people because allowing a full withdrawal, which was something that was done in the past from CPF at the age of 55, so they will put us at real risk of outliving our savings in old age. So this is one particular detail that gives us a hint as to what this source is trying to say about revisions to the CPF scheme. So essentially, uh, people who reach 55 can no longer withdraw all the money from the CPF savings account. Okay, so this has been the change that is made. Okay, so what does the source say? So essentially, um we know that it benefits, right? The changes clearly benefits Singaporeans. Okay, we know that it benefits Singaporeans. And how? Okay, essentially, what it does, right, is to give us financial security because essentially, if they don't change, we might be able to withdraw all the money. And because of that, we might live longer than our money can sustain us for. So we might spend all the money before we die, and that basically leaves us in quite big trouble right after we retire. Okay, so essentially, it allows us to achieve some sense of financial security. Okay, or it basically allows us to sustain ourselves um, after retirement in a sustainable way. Right. So this is our inference for this particular source, the target source itself. So the first approach, as we know, right, actually deals with cross-referencing. Okay, because cross-referencing to other sources or to our contextual knowledge allows us to determine whether a source is reliable or not. Okay, so we can look at whether other sources support or challenge this main source. Okay, so does it support or challenge? If it supports, it's reliable. If it challenges, it is not. and make sure that when you cross-refer to another source, there should be a clear match, okay? So the area of comparison, I mean the area that you're comparing and trying to cross-refer must be the same. So in this case, we're also looking at another source that talks about whether these changes are beneficial or not, the impact of these changes, okay? So if you look at all the other sources, one source that we could perhaps look at will be source E. Okay, so source E is adapted from a paper published by an investment firm in 2013. Okay, so what it says here, source E is life expectancy in Singapore is steadily rising. Singaporeans can expect to live another 20 years from age 65. So, it says something similar, right, to source D, which is about how people now live longer than before. So source E continues to say that there is a real chance that individuals might live longer than expected and outlive their savings. By guaranteeing to provide fixed income payments to retirees through CPF Life, the Singapore government has removed this risk. We believe that this compulsory post-retirement system is unique compared to the rest of the world. Okay, so which part of source E tells us about the impact of the revision to the CPF scheme? Okay, so you realize that yeah, it's actually this part, right? About there's a real chance that we might live longer than expected and outlive our savings, but by guaranteeing to provide fixed income payments to retirees with CPF scheme, the government has removed this risk. Okay? Yeah. So this is the part that is most crucial, right? Because it also similarly tells us that, yeah, actually the CPF scheme has been, sorry, the revisions to the CPF scheme is beneficial, benefits Singaporeans because, yeah, it also says something similar, right? It provides us financial security because it has removed the risk of us outliving our savings. So it does agree. Okay, so let's look at how we can um, structure our response using the cross-referencing method. Okay, so essentially, remember we need to start with an assertion. So we know that source E supports, right? So clearly source E is a source that supports source D. Because it supports source D, we know that it makes source D reliable. Okay, so what we can do is to provide our assertion. Our assertion goes straight to the point. Is source, do you trust what the source tells us about revisions to the CPF scheme? So we can say that we can trust, right? Yeah, or you can say source D is trustworthy. Okay, so just follow the question. If the question asks you, is it reliable? Say that it is reliable. Yeah, so in this case, we use the word trust because the question asks us whether we trust the source. Okay, so you can say we can trust source D as it is supported by source E. Okay, so this is our assertion. We make it very clear why we think it's reliable, in this case trustworthy, because it's supported by source E. Okay, so now we need to provide our inference, right? So we can infer, right, from both sources D and E that, remember, the focus is revisions, right? Revisions to the CPF scheme benefit, you can say benefit in this case retirees, right? Because we're looking at people who might outlive their savings. So we're looking at the older generation, yeah? So benefits retirees as it gives them financial security. Okay? And so this is our inference because both of them support one. I mean they affirm one another. Okay, so these support source E. Okay, so the inference. Then remember now we need to look at individual sources and the details and what they tell us. Okay, so we can quote from source D first. Source D states that. Okay, so we see this part in red, right? Okay, so I'm not going to write the whole thing, but essentially we can quote what source B says, and remember that after that we need to provide a short explanation. So explanation of source B. So this suggests, for example, right, so allowing a full withdrawal will put us at real risk of outliving our savings in long age. So essentially, what does this suggest? It suggests that revisions will allow money to be paid out in a sustainable way. Because now you cannot really withdraw all the money at once, right? One whole lump sum, okay? Now it's given out in monthly payouts, as we know from the background information. Sustainable way, and basically allows them to meet their needs till they die lah. Yeah, okay, for the rest of their lives, okay, essentially. Okay, so yeah, so this, remember this explanation clearly links back to the idea of having financial security, okay? Then you can follow up by saying that source E states that, so you can quote the part that source E mentions, okay, which we write below. Actually, if you want to shorten it, right, the only parts you really need, okay, let me show you how you can shorten it. So actually, you need to quote the whole thing. So you can just quote it in parts that is real, but make sure that when you quote, they make sense, okay? So let me show you what I mean. There's a real chance that individuals might live longer than expected and outlive their savings. So then I can stop. And through CPF line, the Singapore government has removed this risk. Okay, so I just shorten it a little bit. Okay, but it still makes sense, right? If you read the whole thing. Okay, so then you provide a short explanation of source E. Okay, so this suggests that basically the revisions ensure that retirees don't run out of savings, right? Savings and are basically financially supported, okay, through life. Okay, just writing in short form. Okay, so essentially this is how we can approach cross-referencing. Okay, so minimally, I hope that you guys can do this. Okay, to cross-refer to another source that supports or challenges. Okay, so if it challenges, you can say that I do not trust because it's challenged by another source. Okay, in this case, you can look at C as an example for a source that challenges it, but make sure that there's a clear match in your inference. Okay, so if you can infer one that it benefits, the other one should show that it doesn't benefit. Okay, if it challenges. Yeah, so this is how we can use the first approach, which is through looking at cross-referencing. Okay, so you can get a quite a decent mark if you're able to do this successfully already. So another approach that helps us to determine whether a source is reliable or not is by looking at the purpose of a source. Okay, so especially if the source is an authoritative source, as I mentioned, you can use purpose. So in this case, we know that it is authoritative based on the what we call the provenance here. It does have quite a rich provenance. We know who it's from. We know it's made in Parliament, okay? And we know that it's Minister of Manpower Tan Chuan Yin, so authoritative. So we can actually identify some sort of purpose from this, okay? And we can think about the purpose and whether, based on this purpose, this source is reliable or not. So one thing I want you all to note is just because the source has a purpose doesn't make it unreliable. So you need to think about whether in saying what he or she says, the source has the good of society in mind, or does the source have a clear like personal agenda, some sneaky agenda that this person wants to push through. Okay, so let's look at this source and think about whether this one has the good of society in mind, or this one has a clear personal agenda. Okay, so as we know, basically when we look at purpose, we look at audience, message, and outcome. Okay, the Pavamo. Okay, so we can use this particular structure to answer this question. Okay, but firstly, remember because it is a reliability question, we need to have an assertion. Okay, so I'm going to skip the assertion first. We're going to look at the Pavamo. Okay, so okay, yeah. So essentially, we're going to look at Pavamo. So what is the problem? Okay, so you can say that the speech was made as the minister, right, was because what's the problem, right? As we read the background knowledge, we realize that a lot of people are starting to question the benefits of the CPF scheme. So you just write down for it that Singaporeans were beginning to doubt the CPF scheme or beginning to become unhappy the CPF scheme, and so he wants to, okay, for example, convince, okay, so this is my verb, and who is the audience? Clearly Singaporeans, right? So the parliamentary speech is made public, okay? So he wants to convince Singaporeans that, so this is where our message comes in. So actually the message is basically your inference that you see above. Okay, so you can actually use the same idea, right? Revisions to the CPF scheme benefits retirees as it gives them financial security. Okay, so this is the message, okay, which is actually similar to the inference above. Okay, and remember the outcome here is what does the minister in saying this want the audience to do? Remember the outcome is always an action, a response from the audience. Okay, so in this case, it's clearly so that Singaporeans will understand the reasons for the changes and support the revision. Okay, so they'll be very supportive of the government's decision to make changes to the CPF scheme. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is my Pavamo. Okay. Your DE is basically the same. Yeah. Actually, if you had written a cross-reference paragraph, you don't need to repeat the DE again. But if you're just writing Pavamo from the very beginning, looking at the purpose, then you do have to write yeah, the detailed explanation, which is basically this part over here. Okay, for source D. Can? So you write your DE, you follow it up with your DE here. Okay, D plus E. Okay, okay. So we are not done because the last thing you need to do, and remember this, is you need to explain, right, why having this purpose makes the source reliable or not reliable. Okay, so actually basically if you read the source carefully, he's trying to explain, right, the changes, okay, and he's a minister. So actually, we can tell that this source is actually reliable, okay? So we can have the assertion by saying that, yeah, source D can be trusted, right? Or you can say we can trust source D due to its purpose, okay? This is my assertion over here. Okay, then you may do the Pavamo, and then you need to have a short AP. Okay, and the AP stands for the analysis of provenance. So basically, we're going to look at who this person is and why this person has this perspective. Okay, so we're going to look at AP over here. Okay, so as you know that he's the Minister of Manpower, right? So what is he most concerned about? So we know that actually he's most concerned about the long-term planning, right? Planning for Singapore, right? Singapore's future, its labor, basically it's manpower issues in the long term. Okay, concerned about long-term planning for Singapore. So what will happen? So he would be worried, right? Because if more people start to oppose the CPF scheme, what will happen? Right? There might be a risk that the population needing greater support would increase. Okay? So basically people, if we do away with the CPF scheme, or for example, if we do not change, right, we do not make these revisions to the CPF scheme, people might outlive their savings, and when people outlive their savings, who has to come in to support them? Essentially, the government and then also the working population, right? So in this sense, yeah, he's taking the long term in mind, and therefore it's reliable because he's someone who has considered the long term. Okay, so you can say that as Minister of Manpower, as Minister for Manpower, he would be concerned about long term planning for Singapore. That's why he's so worried, right? Because if uh CPF isn't revised, people might outlive savings in old age, right? And thus might need to rely on government for support, government for support in their old age. Okay, so this would be a burden for the government and tax payers, right, who will have to basically support these people in their old age. Okay, so because of this, we can say that it's reliable because he really has taken in the long term to consideration and has weighed the different options. And having this particular knowledge, it makes what he says here more reliable. Okay, so I hope this is clear to you. So remember, for the exam, you can actually assess the reliability of a source by cross-referencing number one to another source or your contextual knowledge, okay, which we did over here in approach one. And in the second approach, approach two, we looked at purpose, okay, for more authoritative sources that have quite a rich provenance. And as mentioned previously, if the provenance is not rich, we can actually use a viewpoint, okay, whether it has a biased or balanced viewpoint as a way to assess purpose. Okay, so yes, that's all from me.